And welcome to session number, which one is it? 30. Okay, why am I? Yeah, there we go. Session number 30 of Genesis in Depth. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines. We've been at this for several years now. It was 2020 when we began. Here it is 2025. We've been through a lot together. Been through both the Old and New Testaments. We've been through a survey of theology and apologetics. We've looked at Romans. We've looked at Habakkuk of all things. And now we're looking at the book of Genesis. And this particular series takes us in some detail through the stories that make up this history of the book of Genesis. So today we're going to begin with the Joseph narrative. Joseph takes us from chapters 37 to 50 of the book of Genesis, and he is the last of the patriarchal narrative. Joseph himself is not in the messianic line. Joseph is the first son of Rachel, and he's a favorite of Jacob. Jacob's next in line is actually Judah. And Judah is neither the heir, that should have been Reuben, nor is he a great guy. Judah is kind of in the middle of the pack as far as the bad guys of the 12 tribes. And Judah is the messianic link as we come through Genesis, and that will carry us on into the book of Exodus. A lot that we're seeing in the Joseph narrative sets the story up that picks up in the first chapter of Exodus. We begin with Exodus and all these things going on, and there rose up a king who did not know Joseph. So the Joseph narrative allows us to understand why Israel was in Egypt at all. And the story turns out that it's for the salvation and for the incubation of the nation in a place outside of the hostile terrain of the Promised Land. The people of Israel under Jacob had grown to be 70 people. That's not a big group. Those 70 were certainly not large enough or well enough trained to be able to overcome the Promised Land. It wasn't going to happen. And it was God's intention that the Promised Land be conquered, that the Amorite, the Canaanite inhabitants of that land be put under control or destroyed, driven out, one way or another. I'm not going to get into the problem of the so-called genocide of Canaan. It wasn't, but I'm not going to get into that. That's for the book of Exodus, and that's a whole other story. Here in Genesis, we get the story of a very friendly relationship between the people of Israel and the people of Egypt. And the Egyptian delta area that we call Goshen turned out to be a great incubator for Israel. They were very well received. Joseph was very popular. The family of Joseph was well treated, and many of them became important parts of the society of Egypt. Where along the way we discover that after the time of Joseph, well, even while Joseph was still alive, members of the family complete with their tribal identities, are found in various parts of the Egyptian archaeology. We find uh, identifiable Israelites working in the Sinai in the copper mines. There are several places that we find copper mines in the Sinai, and in two of those we find inscriptions that were clearly put in place by the copper miners. And those inscriptions are in the very first alphabetic language in the whole world, and that language was Hebrew. Uh, so the very first alphabet was a Hebrew alphabet. The 23 letters of the Hebrew alphabet were invented by Israelites who were familiar with hieroglyphics and took hieroglyphic characters and turned 23 of those into Hebrew letters. So the original archaic Hebrew alphabet is actually at least half from the hieroglyphics. Some of them come from cuneiform script, but mostly from hieroglyphics. And that insight shows us that these people were not slaves. They were intelligent people. They were literate. They were occupying fairly important positions within the overall uh, Egyptian culture and climate at the time. It's not until fairly late in uh, uh, the uh, the sojourn in Egypt that a king turns against the people of Israel. And that turns out to be a fairly important question as well. That, how did that happen? Who was this king? Why did he turn against the people of Israel? But at any rate, at the end of this 430 years, we find Israel enslaved and in need of a deliverer, at which time we're going to see Moses. But at the time of Joseph, and for probably several centuries afterwards, Israel was a welcome guest. They were growing and productive and happy in Egypt. We find the archaeological remains, at least of Joseph's compound, in a place in Israel called Avaris, Avaris. And at Avaris, we find what was probably Joseph's tomb, and it's empty today, of course. And we find other evidence of a sedentary shepherding culture in that region, and this was the people of Israel surrounding the compound of Joseph there in the land of Goshen, at the site that today is called Tel El Daba, but in biblical times was the royal city of Avaris, and that's getting to be a very well understood archaeological factoid. It's just one of several. So let's go ahead and get started. I think we've got what can I share here? Oh, there it is, and we'll do it this way. Bingo. Look at that. The magic happens. So what we're looking at here in 37 through 50 is called the succession from Jacob. In other words, this begins at Toledot. Here's what became of Jacob. And the very next verse, verse 2, starts out now Joseph. Okay, so Joseph is all of this. Being 17 years old, this is 37:2, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. So this is not a great start. Let me see here. What have I got? Have I done something wrong? Oh, yes, of course I have. Why am I not surprised? Okay. Why am I not so I'm going to have to do all kinds of stuff. A little bit of chronology. Uh, we start off with Joseph, and then we're eventually going to bring the whole group down to Egypt. This is the Sphinx. It was old at the time of Joseph, along with the pyramids there in the background. The five pyramids of Giza, Giza, are right outside the city of Cairo today. And those were ancient at the time that Israel was in Egypt. The Israelites certainly didn't participate in the construction of either the Sphinx or the pyramids. Toward the end of their sojourn, they built store cities at Ramesses and Pithom. But here, this would have been part of the landscape at the time of Joseph. He would have operated in this area. So a little bit of chronology. The Joseph story takes place right around 1900 BC. Okay, Abraham was born about 2166. Isaac was born about 2066. Jacob was born about 2006. Those are fairly round numbers, and probably a little. I mean, we can add a bit of a fudge factor, but not very much. Jacob would have been about 130 years old when he went down to join Joseph in Egypt at about 1876 BC. So that's the biblical number. I'm going to give you a chart up here on the next page. To get to 1876 BC, we use two numbers. 1 Kings 6:1 speaks of the dedication of the temple and says that this was done by King Solomon in, I believe, the third or fourth year of his reign, and exactly 480 years after the Exodus from Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt is a major event in Israel's history and is celebrated in the Passover every year. It's a very, very big deal. So, counting back to that first Passover, the Exodus, is 480 years. That takes us back to 1446 BC. In Exodus, we're told that the Exodus from Egypt took place 430 years to the very day, this is Exodus 12, as I recall, after Jacob and the people of Israel went down into the land of Egypt. So we've got 480 years and 430 years. We add that all together, and it comes out to the year 1876. Okay, and some people ask, well, how do you know the dates of Solomon? Well, okay, since you ask, I'll tell you. We actually have hard dates here. By the time of Solomon, the dates really are very firm, and they're the kind of dates that we don't want to fool around with very much. The date of Solomon is clear from the whole royal succession of both Israel and Judah, and those are pinned down by astronomical dating. One of the most important astronomical dates is June 6th, June 6th or 16th, June 6th of 763 BC, when the day books of the Assyrian Empire in Nineveh mentions that there is an eclipse of the sun visible in Nineveh on this certain day. And by using modern mathematics, we know which particular date that was and which particular eclipse that was. And that's what we call a hard date. And using those day books of the Assyrians, we're able to find synchronisms with the kings of Israel, because the Assyrians mention, I conquered this king, or I made a treaty with that king, and I received tribute from such and such a king. And there are half a dozen very clear synchronisms between the Assyrians and Israel. And those give us, in turn, because of the precision of the Assyrian dates, we have precision or hard dates for the reigns of the kings of Israel. So Solomon's date is clear. The 480 years back to the Exodus is clear. Now, the critics, of course, will say, well, none of this makes any difference at all. The Bible is a book of myths and has no relationship to history. It's just it's just a nice book and children should read it, but it has no relationship to history. And the 480 years is just a long time, 12 times 40. So it's actually necessary that we demonstrate the archaeological background of the date for the Exodus. That's done usually in the book of Exodus or in the book of Joshua, wherever that story gets told. And we need to demonstrate the reality of the book or of the length of the sojourn of 430 years. There's a couple of problems with that. I believe Stephen in the New Testament, in his speech, speaks of 400 years. That is, he uses the Septuagint number. At 400, 430, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make a difference. The short form, what I'm going to give you today, is that the 430 actually makes very good sense in terms of Egyptian history. If we accept the 430 and if we accept the 480, we have a sequence of dates that fits the archaeology, that fits the Egyptian historical setting, that fits the overall culture of the ancient Near East. If we reject either of those dates, what we have is a sequence of later dates that make no sense at all. Many so-called scholars on the left side of the theological spectrum would prefer that the Bible not make sense because that fits their narrative. I prefer that the Bible makes sense, and so I look for patterns that, in fact, make good sense, because I expect that God will always tell us the truth. So I'm going to go with this. 1876 BC is the time when Jacob and his family went down into Egypt. Joseph is about 30 years before this, so around 1900 BC is about when we're going to be seeing this. Let me see what else I've got. There it is. This is a family portrait of the people of Israel when they were no, not really. This is a group I took to Egypt in, 1997, 95, back in there. Is Kirk Jameson in this picture? I can't see him. Anyways, no, we took one of my college guys from way back in the day, and some of his students who were graduating that year from high school. They were a great group. We climbed Mount Sinai. We did a bunch of fun things. So this is that group looking up toward the traditional Mount Sinai there in the background. Abraham, about 2166 BC. And those dates are all figured back from the Joseph story, which concludes with that 1876 is neither Joseph's birth nor his death. Neither one. This is actually the time when Jacob came down into Egypt. But the Exodus of 1446, Joseph inviting Israel down into the land, 1876. Jacob's birth, 2006 BC, because of the 60-year span there for Isaac. When Jacob was born, it puts Isaac at 2066 for a birth date, and Abraham at 2166. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old. So the dates all make sense. And I know that the critics would prefer that they not make sense, but alas, they do actually make sense. Okay, what are we going to do with then this whole story? I know that's a whole lot of story. So Joseph, 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. And eventually he's going to end up in Egypt. But this story, this chapter will tell us how that all worked out. Joseph was with his brothers and he brought a bad report. Now, that's almost always a naughty thing to do. A 17-year-old is not above being a, if you'll forgive me, a snot-nosed kid. He was a pain in the neck for his brothers, I'm sure. And that doesn't mean he deserved to be sold into slavery, but he was not being very nice to his brothers. Brought a bad report. So Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. Now, the coat of many colors is a bit controversial. There's some question about what that was about. It is likely that this many-colored coat was a sign of the birthright. In other words, because Joseph was the firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, he wanted Joseph to have the birthright. Now, that wasn't the way it was going to turn out for a lot of reasons. But Joseph is not the child of promise. The child of promise would be born to the unfavored wife, Leah. Now notice that Bilhah and Zilpah, the concubines, have no part in the inheritance at all. There was never a discussion there. There's a legal distinction in the ancient world between wives and concubines. And for the rest of us, it's it seems to be academic, but in the ancient world, there was in fact this kind of distinction. So Israel loved Joseph, and he made him this special coat. And when his brothers saw that his father loved, that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Okay, what you're seeing here is a well and truly broken family. This is not working well. Now, Joseph had a dream. Okay, now this is going to start out because the entire Joseph narrative is about dreams. Joseph is going to have a couple of dreams. And then when he finally gets to Egypt, he's going to meet a baker and a cupbearer who have dreams. And eventually he's going to become a very important character because Pharaoh had a dream. And eventually, as time goes on, we're going to discover that all of these people have dreams. And Joseph is a dreamer, but God had a bigger dream. God was doing something monumentally important with Joseph. And the boys may have intended to hurt him, but they ended up saving the people of Israel, creating a nation within Egypt. So he had a dream, and he told his brothers, which was not smart. But again, he's this naive not very nice little kid. He's a 17-year-old. Now, his brothers hated him, and he said to them, "Hear this dream that I dreamed. Oh, such a dream I had. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Isn't that a great dream, guys?" And his brothers said, "Yeah, right, Joe. Nice dream. Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed going to rule over us?" Hmm. And so they hated him even more for his dreams and because he told them about it. Later on, he dreamed another dream. This is verse 9. And this one, yet he told this one to his brothers as well. And he said, "Behold, I dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Wow, dad, Jacob, and a mom, which could have been Leah at this point, and 11 stars. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, we've got a fairly obvious story going on here. Uh, Mom and dad and 11 brothers are all going to bow down to me. Isn't that a great story? Isn't that a great dream, guys? And apparently Joseph didn't understand that this was going to get him in trouble. Um, but the provocation at the moment is not the most important thing. The oh, the real deal here, what is really happening, is the prediction of the future. This is what we call in literature a foreshadowing of what is to come. This is an outline of Joseph's career in the court of Pharaoh. Joseph would be in a position in Egypt where the boys and eventually Jacob himself will come and bow down before Joseph in Egypt. This is literally amazing. It's the kind of thing that you just can't imagine happening, and yet that is precisely what those dreams were about. So the dreams are going to come true in that sense. The dreams here are functioning a um, as a mechanism of uh, uh, revelation. It's becoming clear. It's being revealed that God is in fact operating in the life and in the uh, outworkings of Joseph's life. Uh, and of course, none of them understand that at the time. Now, as we go along, the story is going to involve a whole bunch of geography. I'll show you a map in the next slide, but we're going to start in the south near Beersheba and head right up the patriarchal highway through Hebron, Bethlehem, Shechem, on far to the north, uh, near the Jezreel Valley, in a place called the Dothan Valley. In Dothan, the brothers, the boys, as I call them, were keeping their herds. That's where they finally spotted Joseph. So let's go on. Verse 12, his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And we've already been to Shechem, and that's a place where the men of Israel felt comfortable. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them." And he said, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So there they are. And the valley of Hebron would be the whole Negev region. This is probably between Hebron and Beersheba is where they're starting. But Hebron is going to be a patriarchal center. This is one of the reasons why today the modern state of Israel is intent on maintaining a population presence in that city of Hebron. The local Arab population is not happy about having the Jews living nearby, and so that continues to be a flashpoint. But the reality is that Hebron was the patriarchal homeland. This is the only place that Abraham ever actually possessed. And this is the place where most of the patriarchs are buried. So that's the area where they are. I'll show you the map in the next slice here. Um, and Joseph was looking for him, and he ran into a man in the Shechem area and asked uh, where his brothers were, and he was wondering where they were pasturing the flock. And the man said, "Well, they've gone away. I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So the people of Shechem were friendly with the sons of Jacob. They obviously passed the time of day. They talked to one another about who's going where. This was not a strange thing. They recognized who this was, and they recognized Joseph. So he said they've gone to to Dothan. Dothan was not a city; it's just a valley that connects with the Jezreel Valley in the north. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him from afar. So he's at a distance. The Dothan Valley is a broad valley. Anybody coming up the valley uh, uh, could take any of a number of paths, but there's some obvious ways to get back. You wouldn't walk in the bottom of the valley. You'd be walking on the side, and it would be easy to spot someone coming from uh, quite a ways off. And so they conspired to kill him. Now this is interesting because killing him is a big step. They say, "Oh, here he is. Let's kill him. That'll just finish things off right away, quick." They said, "Here comes that dreamer. Let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we'll say a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams then." Okay, so it's still all about the dreams. He's had a couple of dreams that are, in fact, true predictions of the future, but they don't want them to happen. Okay, this is sometimes the way people handle the prophecies of God. And we don't want those to happen, really. We'd prefer that something else happens, so let's just do it. The boys, of course, are, for the most part, not godly men, and this is a difficulty. Okay, so let's kill him and throw him into a pit. And when Reuben heard about it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Okay, Reuben is the firstborn. He's the eldest. Presumably, he's the cooler head in the bunch. He says, let's not kill him." And he was hoping that he could sneak back to this pit and let Joseph free some later time. I'm not sure what he had in mind, but it didn't work out. And so they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. There's those Ishmaelites again. The Ishmaelites, like this character we see here in front of the pyramid, was riding a camel or walking next to camels. The camels were normally used as burden bearers. They were the ships of the desert. A camel can go for 150 kilometers without a drink. they just they just walk and walk and walk and walk. They don't need much of anything. They literally shrink their humps in order to get enough water and fat to keep operating. And they can go for a long time without a drink or without food. The Ishmaelites traditionally Now this is true until very recently, up to 100 years ago. The Ishmaelites were the traders of the Middle East. These are people who took their camels around the fringe of the desert. The path that they would be on was probably the Great International Trunk Route. This was the route that leads from the Mesopotamian Valley uh, into Egypt by way of the Jezreel Valley. Now, there's several ways of connecting all of these together, but these Ishmaelites were coming probably from Damascus. They were coming around the south end of the Sea of Galilee and would have gone the length of the Jezreel Valley and connected up to the main trunk route at Megiddo, actually, and then headed south. And Megiddo is very close to the northern end of the Dothan Valley. So from where the boys were pasturing their sheep, they could have looked out uh, the out of the Dothan Valley on into the Jezreel Valley and seen the caravan going past. So it fits very well. And he was sold as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. That again fits uh, that fits the inflation rate that was going at the time. There's very little inflation in the ancient world. So this is around round numbers 2,000 years before Christ. Christ was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Okay, so there's been 20 or 10 pieces of silver inflation in the price of a slave, basically, over 2,000 years. In the modern world, most of the Western governments have seen fit to allow currency to inflate. It's a almost invisible way of taxing the population. Inflation is insidious. It's a very, very bad thing. I can remember buying gas when I was a boy, uh, okay, 65 years ago, for 25 cents a gallon. Today in America, we're paying a bit over $3 a gallon for the same gallon of gas that does the same thing. You can go as many miles today, or maybe a little more, than you could back in the 60s. So it's been a long time. But the inflation in the modern era is much, much more rapid than in the ancient world. Very little changed over that. So Joseph is sold as a slave. They pulled him out of the pit and they sold him to the Ishmaelites. Uh, and these Ishmaelites were carrying gum and balm and myrrh on their way to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, Judah, okay, very practical guy. And remember, Judah is the child of promise. He's the messianic line. Judah says, what profit is it if we kill our brother? Okay, he's still thinking about killing him, but he says, what's in it for us? Apart from being rid of him, let's get rid of him uh, another easy way, just sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let's not lay our hands on him. Let somebody else put their hands on him. Our own flesh and blood, our blood, will sell him as a slave, and then we'll get some money out of the deal. So the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Okay, the Ishmaelites would have been the slavers of the ancient world. Uh, this was very common, and it fits very well. Slavery was a common practice in the ancient world, almost everywhere. Uh, Captives in battle were the most common slaves, but also people who were too poor to provide for themselves might sell themselves into slavery. Uh, Slavery was a very common thing in the ancient world. And everything that we know about the Ishmaelites and about the ancient Near East at the beginning of what we're going to call the Middle Bronze Age, fits this. From the documents that we have outside of the Bible, we know that 20 shekels is a standard price for a slave at this general time in history. We know that the Ishmaelites were active in this trade. The other thing that we're seeing here, just in stark relief, is that the family of Jacob is very badly broken. To call this a dysfunctional family uh, is not too strong a statement. What we're seeing here is disturbing at best. I mean, they sold their brother as a slave in order to make a few bucks instead of killing him. This is really terrible. Um, it's fascinating that Reuben, who just in the previous chapter had lay with his father's concubine, really a disgusting piece of incest, really a bad thing to do. Even in the ancient world, this would have been considered a really insulting thing to his father. Jacob, in any other kind of culture, would have had Reuben put to death. But instead of that, uh, he lets him live. This is not good. So Reuben turns out in this story to be the good guy. I mean, I guess what we have to say is Reuben is the best of a bad lot. Uh, and they're not a lot of good guys. There are not a lot of plaster saints in this whole picture. It is Judah who makes the suggestion of profiting from Joseph's death. Uh, and Judah, of course, is in the messianic line. In the next chapter, we're going to see some more of Judah, and we'll see also how the messianic line goes. I want to show you a little geography, just so that everything is fairly clear. The solid purple that you see over on the right-hand side of this picture is the journey of Jacob and his sons. They come into the land, probably cross the Jordan just north of the Dead Sea. That would be at Adamah, a place we're going to run into later. They went up into the hill up the Tirzah Valley to Shechem. That's their first real stop in the promised land. From Shechem on south to Bethel, where Jacob built an altar, past Jericho, past Jerusalem, to Hebron, and ultimately to Beersheba. That purple line represents what we call the patriarchal highway. The dotted purple line, which comes back north up the patriarchal highway, continues all the way to the north from Hebron up past Jerusalem, Bethel, Shechem, and then farther north to the area of Dothan. The Dothan Valley is the spot where the Ishmaelites pop up. So the green line is the international trade route. This international trade route, sometimes called the Via Maris or the Way of the Sea, comes from farther north. It comes down along the Sea of Galilee, usually either north or south of the Sea of Galilee. It comes out through the Carmel Ridge at Megiddo. Obviously comes past Dothan most of the time, either through Bet Shan or through the Nazareth Ridge farther north. Comes down past Joppa, which is modern Tel Aviv, onto Gaza, which has had a lot of um, interesting news reports lately. That's where the war has been happening. And then along the Mediterranean coast until finally they came into the land of Goshen. Goshen is a part um, of the delta of the Nile River at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. The place where they ended up is Avaris or Tel Ed Daba. Avaris was the capital of Egypt under the Hyksos, Hyksos. The Hyksos are a very interesting people group. They're a Syrian group. They're sometimes called the Shepherd Kings of Egypt. And they ruled in Egypt. They came down as invaders. They dominated the area militarily because they had chariots available. So it was the Hyksos who introduced chariot warfare to Egypt. The Hyksos took the control of the capital and thus became the leaders of the elite of Egypt. The common people were literally serfs or peasants. They were connected to the land. They owned nothing. They were and they had no say. Okay. Some have argued that Joseph was a Hyksos, but that really doesn't work. The Hyksos period begins about 1750 BC, about 120 years after the time of Joseph and Jacob. It ends in about 1520 BC. There rose a king who drove the Hyksos out of Egypt, and his name was Ahmose the First. Ahmose the First hated the Hyksos, and it was a major project for him to secretly put together an army that could drive the Hyksos out of Egypt. Because the people of Israel were also of Middle Eastern descent, they were Syrian descent, they had beards and hair, and they took care of sheep. Ahmose hated the people of Israel as much as he hated the Hyksos. Now, the people of Israel were also peasants, so they weren't driven out. They weren't part of the ruling family. But having driven the Hyksos out, he decided to enslave the people of Israel. That happens around 1520 BC, about the time of Moses. Okay, so all of that is going on at that much later part of history. Avaris is a very important place, and I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of archaeology of Avaris today, but there's a lot going on there that is an important background for the Joseph story and for the rest of what we have here. The red line from Beersheba to Goshen area is the likely line that Jacob and his family and the brothers, when they're going back and forth through the desert, took to get their grain. And then when Jacob came down into Egypt, that would have been the route that he took. It is proposed by some scholars that later on the Exodus itself will take this route. This goes along the southern edge of the great sand desert of the Sinai and at the base of a bunch of mountains. So some have argued that Mount Sinai is along that line. I prefer the southern route, but that's for another book. Doesn't really make all that much difference for the Joseph story. So land of Goshen today is called the Wadi Tumilat, and you can see that if you look really close. There's a little blue uh, labeling there. Sukkot and Pitam and Avaras are labeled, but also the Wadi, W dot stands for Wadi, a valley, usually dry, called the Tumalat. And this was a valley that uh, had a canal running from uh, the branches of the Nile all the way out to Lake Timsah, and from there out to the Mediterranean Sea. The Egyptians actually tried to have a port city at that spot. It didn't work terribly well, but they had this canal in place. And the Wadi Tumilat itself is a broad, very fertile area with desert both north and south, but the Wadi itself quite a fertile area. This is where Israel grew up and had all their growth. Okay, that's going to take us into the next chapter, chapter 38 of Genesis. I'm just going to have time to introduce. And this is, frankly, not terribly impressive. Um, this is literally a shameful episode. The I guess I need to finish up chapter 37 first. We'll get to 38 next week. Reuben returned to the pit. He saw that Joseph wasn't in the pit. He tore his clothes, returned to his brothers, and said, "The boy is gone. And I, where shall I go?" And then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in the blood. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father, and he said, "This we found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "Alas, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth on his loins, and mourned his son for many days. All the sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So Joseph is in Egypt, sold to Potiphar. And that story will continue in chapter 39. Potiphar is an interesting name. That's an Egyptian name. The critics would like Joseph to go down into Egypt during the Hyksos period, but all of the names, all of the traditions, all of the what I call the local color that we see in the Joseph narrative is Egyptian. The names are Egyptian, the traditions are Egyptian, the practices are Egyptian, the food, the taboos, all of the stuff that we see in the Joseph narrative is Egyptian. It's not Hyksos. The Hyksos were Semitic people. They were not Hamitic. They spoke a different language. They had different customs, culture. Joseph was not sold to the Hyksos. He was sold to the Egyptians. Potiphar was an important bureaucrat. Uh, as in most cultures, one of the really great ways to become fabulously wealthy is to become a government official. Potiphar was a wealthy man with a large household because he worked for the government. And as in the modern world, that's a way to become very, very wealthy, whether rightly or wrongly, it's a way to become wealthy. Um, we're going to see more of Potiphar later. Yeah, we're going to see more of Potiphar's wife, who is a very interesting lady indeed. When we get to chapter 28, we have this story of Judah and uh, a a young woman, a Canaanite woman by the name of Tamar, um, who is interesting. We see already Judah is not being particularly careful. He's got a Canaanite wife and had two children and uh, married one of them to uh, a girl named Tamar. The name is not a Hebrew name; it's a Canaanite name. So Judah is already not being particularly careful with the messianic seed. Now, he doesn't really know that or understand it, but remember that Judah is the messianic line. Chapter 38 is not an accident. This chapter was put in this spot in Genesis to remind us again of this messianic line. And we're seeing a contrast between Judah and Joseph. Joseph is going to turn out to be a savior of Israel. God has chosen him and placed him to be a savior of Israel. And yet the brother Judah, who is in fact the child of promise, turns out to be a, a real monster. He's really quite a bad man, and he doesn't do much of anything right here. Later on, he will get his, but this story is a really quite disgusting episode in the life of Israel, and points out once again that God has chosen to redeem the world through a broken family. Many of us have families that are less than perfect. Uh, uh, Children and grandchildren who have not behaved the way we want them to, our own shortcomings. We deal with people in our churches whose families are broken by divorce, by adultery, by corruption of various ways. And the reminder is that God is a redeemer. He is in the business of fixing broken lives. He is in the habit of saving broken people and of bringing good out of that which is demonstrably evil. So we shouldn't be looking for perfect families for our churches. And we shouldn't be expecting that all of our families will be perfect all the time. As a church, we too, like God, should have a redemptive eye open. How can we fix this? How can we help this? How can we make this a saving thing rather than a judging moment? Uh, God saved the world at the far end of a line that has a lot of stopovers in places that, frankly, many Christians would rather not go. God chose to save the world through a broken family. The least we can do is to love those broken families enough to share Christ with them. Okay, I'm going to quit there for the day. And we're going to come back next week. We'll go quickly through chapter 38 because, frankly, I don't like to linger in it. And then we'll go on into chapter 39, where we see the right way to behave around women. It's a good story to contrast with the story of Judah. Anyway, let me make my way out of this, see if I can stop the share. There it goes. And now I'm back with you all. Okay. Thank you for being here. This is always fun for me. I appreciate this time. Look forward to seeing you again next week. And for those, let's see, who all am I looking? Okay, I'll be Como is here. Okay, hi Joel. Uh, uh, One of these days, sometime soon, we're going to have uh, daylight savings time here in America. That won't change the timing in Italy, but it will change the time in America and in the Philippines. Our Filipino tune-ins are going to be middle of the night at a different time, but our daylight savings time goes this Sunday, and so there'll be a couple of weeks when we'll be there, but it doesn't change the Italy time. We'll see you again next week, 8:30 in the evening in Italy. God bless everybody. We'll see you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Grazie, Dr. John.
Grazie.